Hey everyone, it's Carter. Welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the show where I talk to writers of all sorts of backgrounds and we have a lovely conversation, and it culminates with an impromptu storytelling, which is always fun and often scary because sometimes I don't know what I'm going to say and I get nervous, but it's a challenge. I realize, like, sometimes I'm actually interviewing somebody and having the conversation, and then I'm already worried about, oh my God, how's our little storytelling going to go? But I realize I like the challenge. I like putting myself in somewhat uncomfortable positions and seeing if I can rise to the occasion. And I don't always. But today's story was pretty good. I really had a good time. Today I talked to Alverne Ball. Alverne Ball, who, Alverne's an interesting guy. So he's the kind of writer who knew that he wanted to get into that from an early age, and he actually has a specific moment where he read a story and he's like, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but this is what I want to do. And sometimes people have those moments, and other times it's just kind of a gradual process of getting into it. But he knew, and that moment was powerful enough that he went to undergraduate for fiction writing, and then he got his MFA from Columbia College, and wrote his first book in between his undergraduate and his graduate school. And the rest is history from there. And he was fascinating to talk to. He grew up in Chicago, and we talked a lot about Chicago, a lot about how the environment he grew up in and his family really influenced his writing. And he has an interesting story about how, reflecting some of the local dialect from the streets where he grew up was off-putting to some publishers and agents. So that was kind of fascinating to hear, and how he was really that he didn't want to change it because he really wanted to be true to the voices that he grew up with and honor that experience. And finally he found a publisher who was just like, we think this is great. And his latest book is actually a sequel to that first book, where I was referencing about the dialects. His latest book is Blue Religion. So it's about Detective Frank Calhoun. And he's very excited about it. I'm very excited for him. It sounds like a fantastic book. By the time this episode comes out, it will already have been released, but October of 2021. And so, like I said, we had a great storytelling based on a sentence from The Tender Bar, which is a fantastic memoir. So I hope you enjoy. This is my conversation with Alverne Ball. How are you?
I am good. I've been just got off one call, a meeting for a book festival that I'm going to do a virtual panel on. So it's been good. It's been a day of meetings. Yeah.
Yeah, it was funny. I was talking to somebody today about virtual panels for authors, and there's kind of and it's probably not just for authors, it's for everybody. There's just this burnout of like, yeah, oh my God, do we have to do another thing? That's
right. Another year of this, like right. Already, like the whole year is over. Yeah.
It was actually my PR rep, and she said with her other clients, like, they're not even like booking virtual events until January because there's just no appetite for it. So if your book is coming out now, then it's just like, which, I mean, you've got your title coming up. Is there, are you doing much of a launch for it? Is there?
There was going to be an in-person signing that turned virtual. So I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So now it's a virtual lunch, and that's literally it. And it's just like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's very frustrating. I haven't done an in-person book event in a while. And
Yeah,
I was going to go to BoucherCon this year in New Orleans, but then that got thankfully canceled.
yeah, yeah,
That was going to be a shit show
yeah. I
of
think
viral
so.
activity. But I was really looking forward to seeing my friends and connecting with people and just kind of being back
Yeah,
in that world. But yeah,
and
not for a
that's the
little
thing.
while.
The only thing I've never been to like I've never been to any type of book con. Like, well,
Yeah,
I've been to like Comic Cons and stuff
yeah,
like that, but
yeah.
nothing, in regards to like mystery writing or books. And I'm like, oh, this is gonna be my year to do that. And I'm like, not yet. Is that not happening?
Yeah, it's so weird when you start going to conferences for writing because you exist in this, for me as well, exist in this professional workplace with another job, and you're used to going to conferences, and the conferences about whatever it is. It might not be that
Yeah,
interesting. You go to a book thing, and it's the same thing. It's the same kind of conference, except there's like breakout panels on like how to kill somebody with poison. And you're like, oh, this is a lot more interesting than the other world in which I exist.
right, right, totally.
so, so where are you? Right where you live?
I'm in Temecula, California.
Where in California?
Temecula.
Temecula. That's
Yeah,
northern, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And
Still,
did you?
it's still SoCal, but yeah, a bit closer to San Diego.
Oh, okay. Okay. So yeah, Southern California. Okay, got it. Well, that's a nice area.
Yeah,
Have you been there for a while?
for about 3, maybe 4 months, I think. Yeah,
You just
yeah,
got
yeah,
there,
yeah,
and you
yeah,
moved out there for work.
yeah,
Got
yeah,
it. But you grew up in Chicago, right?
yeah, yeah. Grew up in Chicago
Like
and
in
then lived in. Yeah,
where in Chicago?
it's the west side of the city.
Okay.
So I grew up on the west side of Chicago, pretty much till I was God. It was what 28, 29, 30, maybe.
Okay.
Moved to LA for 2 years and then moved back into Illinois. And lived in Joliet for the last eight years, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you still
Yeah.
have a lot of family in the Chicago area.
Yeah. Yeah. All my brothers and sisters are
Everyone's
still
there.
there.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
how many siblings did you have
I
growing up?
got I have two brothers and four sisters.
Oh
So
wow.
seven of us all together. Yeah.
Big family.
Big.
So what was that experience like growing up in Chicago with the big family and
A
what was
lot
the
of game nights, a lot of visits to drive-in.
yeah,
We
oh yeah,
love, yeah,
wow.
man. My family's big on. We're very big on board games. So
Yeah.
so Monopoly for us becomes like a marathon, an all-night marathon. Like,
Is it pretty brutal, pretty
yeah,
competitive?
yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. Like, I think the last time we played, I think we were up to like 5 in the morning.
Oh my
Like,
god.
me and one of my sisters were like the last, but it's just like, no, you can't give up. And
Just
somebody
blood, sweat,
until,
and
yeah,
tears.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like, who's gonna last the longest?
Wow.
And I think the longest, I think my sister won, because I was just like, okay, if I don't give up, we're gonna be here for another 2 more hours.
Yeah, Monopoly's
I
a
had to give it
commitment.
up.
I don't have the pay.
Yeah,
I don't have the
yeah,
patience for it. I used to play with my kids sometimes. I'm like, I don't know. I
yeah,
don't care
yeah,
if I
yeah,
lose. Just
yeah.
I want to
I
go do
tried
something
playing. I
else.
try. I tried playing with my kids. I was like, nah, no, because this, nah, I won't lose these. So I'm like, no. So every time you
Right.
bring it out, I'm like, we can play the game of life or something else, but we're not playing Monopoly.
That's funny. Yeah, it's a
So
board game.
yeah,
So that's great. Yeah. We
yeah,
used to do that a little bit with my family, but not too much. But that's a great tradition to have if you can kind of stay, together as a family in terms of not
yeah.
cutting each
Right.
other's
Not
throats.
cutting each other's throats.
Because sometimes you're just like, I don't want to play anymore. I don't want
Yeah,
to play
yeah,
with this person.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so I loved Clue as a kid.
Oh
So yeah,
yeah.
that was a lot of, for me at least. I came up in, before the digital age of things. So we went out and played.
Right.
And you actually played out in the street with your neighbors and stuff. So that was me and my brothers and sisters. But we range in age. So I got two siblings that are closer in age with me. So I always had somebody to play with.
Is there out of all your siblings, is there a thread of that kind of creativity or that desire to write or to draw or
Um,
artistic
yeah,
leanings?
I guess so in some ways. We all have like a trait, like our own type of trait.
Yeah.
One of my brothers is just good with playing any sport you put in front of him. He can play it.
Hmm.
One of my sister has what I call the Lex Luthor complex, where she has a photographic memory.
Oh,
She
wow.
when she sees something, she literally sees it. She's
Like
like, I got it.
clinically photographic memory.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
That's amazing.
I have another sister that you put a number in front of her, kind of what matter it is. She's really good with numbers. Yeah, I have another brother who's just really handy with his hands. Any project you can put in front of him, he can build. Or he can. I just remember we were in high school and he had an apprenticeship to be an electrician. I'm like, you're in high school, so it's just
Wow.
like
Yeah.
And then I have another sister who's really great with like baking, man.
Yeah.
So we all have these weird like traits, but for the most part, we all love to read. That's
Yeah.
the one thing I think
Okay.
my mother instilled in us
Yeah.
somehow.
So it came from the parents. Yeah. So your mom was a
Yeah,
big reader.
yeah, just huge reader. Like
Just
she could carry
anything.
on these any and everything. She
Yeah.
loved Laurel. She loved Laurel K. Hamilton books,
Yeah.
so she would like devour those books. I remember one time like she used to have these big garbage bags full of like big black garbage bags just full of books. I used to think like, are you throwing these out? And like one day I went to pick it up to throw it out. She goes, what are you doing? Those are my books. I'm like, yeah, they're in the garbage bag. And I'm throwing them out. She goes, oh no, I'm reading those. I'm like, what do you mean reading those? And she starts pulling them out. She's like, I read this one, I read this one, I read this one. So she would keep them in like a garbage bag and she would just read them. And then when she got done, she'd throw it back in the bag until she had finished the bag. And then she'd be like, okay, now you can go get rid of the books. So that
Wow.
was the thing. Yeah,
Why?
she was like,
Why a garbage bag?
because she wanted it was either like she kept them in for some reason. I don't know why the garbage bags out of all things. Like she could have kept them in any kind of bag, but she always kept them in a
Right.
garbage bag. But she would take them everywhere she went. She would like it was her way of like carrying books with her. So now where she went, she kept a bag of books with her. It was just her thing. Like a bag of books was her thing. So everywhere she went, you'd always find a bag of books somewhere sitting in a corner
Wow.
somewhere. That was
And
her
then
thing.
and then the Kindle came out and she got rid of her back problems.
Right. But it was just funny, just like when she was done, she'd be like, okay, here, now you can go donate these or throw more. But my mother didn't throw away books, so it was more like, oh, go donate these but yeah, she kept every book in a bag for some reason. So thing.
Well, it's so you're obviously a reader as well, but
Yeah.
but not unlike a lot of people, but you seem to, based on the fact that you got an MFA, you seem to have known relatively at a young age, like, hey, this is what I want to do. Like, what was that kind of the genesis of feeling like, this is the area I want to go into?
Oh, so actually, in some ways, I didn't.
Oh.
So yeah, I remember reading. I think it was a fourth grade or something like that. I couldn't read.
Hmm.
I self-taught myself how to read.
Hmm.
So it was at one point in my life I had a speech impediment, and I couldn't read. Like I just couldn't grasp it, no matter what. And then I remember one time this kid laughed at me in class because I couldn't pronounce the word, and I thought I never want to feel like I'm stupid or something. So I
Huh.
decided I had an uncle that used to tell me any words you don't know, you look it up in the dictionary. And you know how they have the phonetical spelling and how they
Yeah, yeah,
say it.
yeah.
You read the phonetics to get the understanding of the word or how to pronounce it. And then any words you don't understand in the dictionary, you have somebody read the definition to you. So that's what I did. So I would take these books home and I would like just go through and underline words I did not understand. Then I would look them up in the dictionary. And if I
Oh
couldn't
my
read it, I
God.
would have somebody read back the definition to me and I would learn that word. And then after a few months, my vocabulary just started expanding. And I was like, okay, it just had all these massive amount of words. But the genesis for how I knew I loved storytelling was I was 6 years old. My mother was giving me a bath, and she told me the story about the fall of Lucifer and how Lucifer thought he was um, this beautiful superior being, and that's what got him kicked out of heaven. Was that he just thought he was, he just
The
thought he was
pride.
better
Yeah.
looking. He was the pride, right? And I just remember being fascinated by that story. And years later, when I got into doing comic books, that was one of the first comic books I made was about the fall of Lucifer. But from the moment I heard that story, something sparked in me. Like I knew I wanted to tell stories, I just didn't know how. but that I wanted to do it specifically, but I knew that I loved like sitting there listening to a good story being told.
Isn't that interesting that you can trace that back to,
Yeah.
to two seminal events, right? One being bullied,
Right.
I'll show this kid, I'll get an MFA.
Right.
But to know that, because I've talked to a few people that there was a specific, like, this day this happened and this light turned on, and that, yeah, you don't know how that's going to take shape for you, but that story just hit you in a way that you're like, I want to be a part of this world somehow.
Yeah.
So where did you end up getting your undergraduate?
At Columbia College too. So I got my undergraduate at Columbia College Chicago, where I studied fiction writing, and then got my undergrad. Took a year off, worked at a coffee shop / ice cream parlor, and wrote a novel. And then
All right.
yeah, after taking a year off, like did the American Dream, wrote a novel, and then decided, okay, I want to go back to school. I want to become a better writer, and then I got my MFA in creative writing again. And yeah, just by that time it was like it's the one thing I knew that like I wanted to do was write.
So you finished undergraduate and you had that year off working in the coffee shop and ice cream place. You're writing the novel. Do you feel like your undergraduate degree and your work in fiction writing from Columbia kind of really like set the stage for you to write that novel, or do you think you could have done it otherwise?
No, I definitely think going to Columbia definitely set the stage for that novel. And so I wrote that novel, and then I turned around and started writing the novel that would get published. So my first novel was called The Mortician. It was about some kid. I was a big Godfather fan. So it was about a kid who was secretly working for the Chicago crime syndicate and stuff. But I think what Columbia did for me was it helped me find my voice. It helped me nail down a lot of crazy ideas that I had about like storytelling, and really helped me ground the understanding of storytelling. Because some writers I think every writer sees visually, but some see differently. And what Columbia teaches you to do is see these images that, when you're writing, it's called writing in the mind, to like project them out in front of you so that you see them playing out in front of you as much as possible. So for me, it became this thing of like seeing these characters play out in front of me to the point that the teachings made everything that I was seeing just grounded everything I think I had been seeing since a kid. Like, because I'm a big cartoon fan, and that kind of thing. So I think for me, it was seeing those things in front of me, seeing those characters made it real for me. And it was like, oh, okay, so I have been doing this right. I'm not crazy. There are people that write, they're telling stories exactly how I see them, which is very visually and very 3D instead of like a 2D form.
So you're basically visualizing it all, and then all your job as a writer is to describe the scene. It's like, this is what I see happening right in front of me.
Right.
And then how do I describe it and convey it in a way that is
convey the senses, where
right.
That's what something that I think was big for me with Columbia was that not only was it talking about like description of characters, but it talks about space. The story, it's called the story workshop method. It talks about the space and senses, like not only what you touch, not only what you see, but what tastes, what smells, so it kind of brings in all those 5 senses into the story, so that you're incorporating all those things into your stories, whether you know it or not.
Right. You're not just ticking the box saying, make sure I describe everything.
Right.
And I think a lot of it is hit and miss, or a lot of not hit and miss. A lot of it, I think, is trial and error, I should say. It just takes a while. Like, you found your voice through many years of school and writing. I assume many pieces of at least short fiction, and and then you wrote a novel that didn't go anywhere. I wrote 3 novels that didn't go anywhere, but you're learning each time. And I think what you say about the senses is totally right, because it's like, how do I convey, because it's about tone, right? Because tone is a character. It's like, what is the atmosphere of this scene, and how do I convey that, and how do I convey it without kind of overdoing it? Because I think that is easy to do. You're like, go on paragraph after paragraph about, some creepy atmosphere. Like, give the readers a little credit. We get it.
Right.
we know what an abandoned basement is like. You don't have to go into too much detail. So what did you do with that first novel? When you finished it, did you think, okay, this is my practice novel, or did you try to publish it, try to get an agent?
No, I knew it was my practice novel. It was just something that I had, it was in my head. I had to get it out. But it became a practice novel that, for me, not the practice novel to say, oh, okay, I wrote it, now let's see where we go. It was a practice novel to see if I could write a novel.
Right.
And
which is the big step, right?
Right. Like,
I mean, I
can write short stories. Can I write a full novel and make it make sense?
Did you know in undergraduate that you wanted to write a novel?
I did. All I've ever wanted to do was write novels. More than I think anything I've ever written, I've always just wanted to write books.
Right.
So I knew I wanted to write a novel. I just didn't know what kind of novel I wanted to write. Because the fiction writing department I was in, it was very much literary based.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I'm going to write the literary novel. But then as I started progressing, they would introduce, sci-fi, a little bit of mystery, all these subgenres. And I started realizing I love literature, but that's not what I'm interested in writing just yet. I was like, I'll write literature when I'm in my 80s and have nothing else I want to do. Not to knock literature. I love it. It's just that for me, I had, it didn't take my attention as much as the genre stuff that I wanted to write. There's still a short story collection in my head that's literary that I'm one day gonna write, but it's just those who write it very well, and those who write it inspire me. And I was just like, I'm not at that level where I'm ready to inspire the next generation, I guess.
Right. Well, and it's about what you're passionate about, right? Because why do any of us choose to write what we write? And it's just because it's what's interesting to us. Like, that's, when you sit down and you're in the middle of a scene that's exciting you, it's going to hopefully excite the readers. And if I try to sit down and write, something totally outside of my wheelhouse, I mean, it's a fun challenge. But there's a point where your interest kind of wanes, and then you're like, oh, this is garbage. I don't really like this. So, and just out of curiosity, so you went back and you got your MFA, but between undergraduate and your MFA, were there any courses about just like publishing as an industry, or was it all about
there was
writing?
A couple. I think there was like one or two that I can think of. One was taught by a great teacher of mine, Sam Weller, who went on to write the Bradbury Chronicles and a bunch of other great books. He talked a lot about the business or the life of publishing outside of, like, once you got out of school, what do you do with this degree? How do you make a living on it? One of my great mentors, Mort Castle, who was written a number of horror books, got a couple Bram Stokers. He was really big on, like, okay, you learn the mechanics, you learn all this, but what do you do with it afterwards? How do you make a living doing it? So I had some great teachers like that really talked about making your living as a writer. And from there, it was just like, because a lot of what you don't get taught in school is like, okay, yeah, you can go write for A, B, C, and D company. You can go copy edit and do all these other things. So, Columbia, at least at the time, the fiction department would say, okay, would show you these different paths that your writing degree could take you. But nobody would like go, hey, let's go down this path and talk about how you get into the market, or how do you get an agent, or how do you publish a book. And then after a while, I think what the department started to realize was that at one point that they had to start talking about the business of writing.
Right.
because if it's great if you know how to write, but if you don't know how to navigate the business world of it, what does it matter? You can write the greatest novel
Right.
and not sell it.
Right. Because you're producing a commodity ultimately that
Right.
you're trying to get onto the marketplace, and there are a lot of mechanisms that have to work in tandem for that to happen, and you are just one part of that.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it is. It's, I would think like they would be doing a disservice if they didn't have those courses, because it could be very. I think it could be very deflating to go out there and say like, it's like teaching acting and then just like, okay, go to Hollywood and just see what happens. You know, most people fail. And,
Yeah.
you know, I think courses on how do I land a regular full-time job and write at the same time? How do I time manage? What's a word count I should put together every day in order to get a novel done in a year? And how does that look? Because that's really how you do it. It's just that consistency. Because as people with full-time jobs, we have to navigate those waters, or with families. And,
Right.
you know, and there's not a lot of money in publishing for 99% of people. Right. So it's really, you know, how do you get to that next level? And that's, I think it's a continuous question, and certainly a continuous journey for me, because, you know, it is a little bit of an opaque industry too, because it's not always, nobody really has those answers.
Yeah.
Right. They have ideas and they have assumptions, and those are changing all the time. So it's not like people are trying to hide things from you. They just kind of, I don't know why that book did really well and this other book didn't.
Yeah. It's like the whole idea of like how you break into Hollywood. One way somebody breaks in is going to be total opposite for how somebody else breaks. Like, you know, everybody talks about Kevin Smith back in the day, you know, maxing out his credit cards to make, you know, one movie. It's like, that is great. You tried that, the next person tried that, maxed out their credit cards and went bankrupt.
Right. The next 100 people who did that.
Right. It's just, you know, there's never an easy answer, an easy way in. It's like everybody has a different way in because it's their time, or, you know, luck of the draw or whatever. So yeah.
And it's not any kind of straight line, right? Like you can have early success, or you can have early moderate success, and then flounder for many years. And, you know, even though you might be producing the same kind of output, you might, so I'm talking to a buddy of mine coming up in a few weeks who had moderate success, and then he started writing under a different name, and that did much better. And I mean, it's crazy. It's, you know, it is about, you know, especially once you get a number of things under your belt, at some point it's about you as a commodity as much as it is about your individual stories. And, you know, people want to know, like, okay, when's the next Alverne Ball book coming out? They don't really care what the book is, but they like your writing. So then the novel after the practice novel is the first one that sold.
Yeah. And that one was actually my thesis novel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, with the one that sold, did you approach publishers directly with that, or did you have an agent at that time?
So I went to I got like, oh God, I think there's like 150 maybe of rejection letters from agents. And so I got to a point where I got tired of like querying agents. There were like 2 or 3 that were really interested. But the biggest thing is they wanted me to change certain languages of characters. And I was like, well, if I change the language of this, how this character speaks, it's not authentic to this character. And so,
what do you mean changing the language of the character?
Because I had this character that came from the streets, from the rough streets of Chicago. So he spoke with the street, you know, about the street lingo, the street accent. Think if you were listening to any character from The Wire, you know.
Got it.
And
how are you writing that out? Are you writing that out almost kind of phonetically, or are you just using?
No, phonetically.
Yeah.
You know, or more like how you would think Zornia Hurston writes when she's doing any one of her short stories, you know, where it is Southern, you know, it is Southern language, you know, spoken Ebonics, if you want to call it that, whatever, you know.
And were the agents just finding it confusing or distracting, or what was the issue?
Their thing was that they found it confusing, but it wasn't like the whole book was written that way. It was, one or two characters in the book when they show up, when they meet the main character or whatever. So the main character had nothing to, so good 99% of the book wasn't that. But I got to a point where it was like, oh, we love the concept behind it. We love the characters, but we don't know if we can sell it because this takes place in a world that's not, it's set in Chicago, and it's crime and, in a crime infested neighborhood, in Chicago. But they were like, we don't know how to sell that. And I'm like, what do you mean?
What?
Like, a TV show called The Wire.
Right.
Clearly.
Right. This is The Wire, but not in Baltimore.
Right. And so it's just like, what do you mean you don't, thing of it,
Yeah.
So, sorry. So I got to a
good.
point where I was like, okay, I'm just going to start, I'm going to just start soliciting publishers. And I kind of got the same thing from a few publishers, or, I get a rejection and I'm like, okay. So after about a year of querying and getting rejections, one of my friends had just published like a short story collection from this small press. And so I was like, you know what? They published his book. It's Chicago Stories. I'm just going to send them a query. And I sent them a query and they got back to me like probably a few hours later or the next day.
Wow.
I published this book. Can we read, I sent them like a query with a chapter and it was like, can we read the rest of it? And they read it and they were like, we want to publish it. Again, it was a small press. And I thought, you know what? Okay. I'll take a long shot, and they published it. And the biggest thing what made me stay with them was that when they came up about these characters who spoke, Ebonics or street or whatever, they had no problem. They were like,
right,
no change any of that. It was like they were like, this makes it authentic to this certain area in Chicago, and I was like, finally, so I get, and so. And so I felt like if I changed the voices of certain characters, I was erasing real people that I knew.
Sure.
I was erasing a whole neighborhood, a whole way of life that exists. And so in the midst of publishing my first novel, which is called Only the Holy Remain, it was a crime novel, I started realizing that, there's a whole erasure of this culture in Chicago, because I was reading a lot of Chicago authors at the time too, a lot of Chicago crime authors. And I just realized like everyone was middle-aged and white, but and I was just like, when they were telling a certain type of crime story on a certain section of the city, and I was doing the opposite, where I was doing the same thing, I guess, but the opposite of the section of the city that they were telling. I was telling them from the west side of the city. And I was like, wow, it's interesting that when, as a Chicagoan, I look at these stories, I'm like, there's an erasure of a whole neighborhood, a whole section of the city that, from what I know, and growing up, it had its bad times, but it also had some great times. There's some great that lived in these neighborhoods, working class people. And I thought, wow, we're being erased. And so that became my thing. Like, I wanted to tell stories where I came from. I wanted to let the world know that this neighborhood, this section of the city exists, and it's not all bad. Some great things and great people and great, places in these neighborhoods that never get the shine or the light of day that they probably could get, So that became my thing, and how my first novel got published.
Did you set your novel back in time, so like when you lived there?
So my first novel was set like, I think was set in like 2008, 2010. So it wasn't like, so it wasn't like far back, like, like in the 80s or 90s. It was set modern time at the time. But it was basically, it was about a former Marine chaplain turned homicide detective who's investigating the murder of a priest and uncovers a conspiracy that stretches to their days when they were Marine chaplains in Fallujah, Iraq. So it had this whole undermining Iraq war thing to it, as as an underlining storyline about something that occurred between them when they were all chaplains in the Marines that has now come back to hunt them, you know.
Well, that, it's funny you described that book, and I hear it and I think, oh my God, that's a lot of research you got to do.
Right.
To me, it just sounds like a big pain in the ass, because I'm like, all right, you've got a homicide detective, so who do I talk to about that?
Right.
You not only do you have Marines, you have chaplains in the Marines and stationed overseas. So you have to, like, how do I authenticate all of this and make it evocative, make it real, make it true to what happened? And also, you're talking about people and professions that you don't want to do a disservice to. You want to make sure you're representing. What is do you enjoy that aspect of writing, the research and talking to people and trying to get the reality behind it all?
I do to some degree, but at the time I was a young writer when I wrote this. So at the time, what I found, which was kind of interesting, that I was posting chapters of the book on some like fan fiction site, and there was a guy who was a Marine chaplain. And he starts reading. He goes, "You got everything right, but this one thing, this one detail." And I was like, "Wait, what?" And he goes, "Yeah, I used to be a chaplain." He's like, "We wouldn't wear our stripes on this end, we wear them on this arm." And I was like, "Wait," he's like, "But you got this right." He goes, "And you wouldn't," and he's like, "You got all the scene right, but this one base camp name needs to be changed. It wouldn't be called this." And I was like, "Oh,
wow. Who said that guardian angel?"
Like I didn't even realize that he became my go-to. So he was like, "Yeah, post another chapter." So it was like a fan fiction site where you could post chapters of your novels or something. And I would post chapters and people would comment on. And so that became like my first readers. And then my two friends, Jolene and Vanessa, who I went to school with, they became like my real first readers. Once I had the manuscript done, I gave it to them and I was like, just tear it apart. Tell me what you think of it. And they came back with notes and little small things. And that's actually how my first novel, this novel started, because I wrote it as a short story. And one of our friends, Vanessa, she goes, "What happens next?" I was like, "What do you mean happens next? It's the short story, that's it." She goes, "No, there could be more." And when she said that, I go, "Yeah, what would happen next?" And that's how the novel like developed.
The Blue Religion?
Yeah. No, Only the Holy Remain.
Okay.
My first published.
But then Blue Religion is a sequel, no?
Yeah, Blue Religion is a sequel. Yeah.
So what made you want to go back? Was that always like, okay, this is going to be a series about this detective, or was it?
I think in some ways I always knew it would be. I just didn't know what the series would be about.
Yeah.
Being a big Michael Connelly fan and and Harry Bosch, I was like, oh man, I want to write a detective series. I love detective series because I love Sherlock Holmes and stuff of that nature. So, but I didn't know what the story would be about. I didn't have any idea of who Frank Calhoun was. He was just a name inspired by my stepfather. And so I thought, man, this would be a really cool name for a detective. I didn't know what the story was about. And then as I was starting to write, I wrote the first chapter of him finding the priest's body. And somehow when I asked what happened next, it just started coming to me. And I was like, what if, this happened and this happened? And so by the time Blue Religion came around, Blue Religion was inspired by a crime that happened. I was living here in California at the time, in LA. And I used to always watch the Chicago morning news as I got ready for
okay.
Which is weird. I know.
You're connected to Chicago, boy, I'll tell you.
Yeah. And there was a crime that had happened where this police officer had been killed, and he had been killed along with a civilian inside a car. And as I was sitting there watching this unfold over the city, the police had like a suspect within a few hours, and it was like a manhunt going down. And they pulled this guy out of his home, and, arrested him. And as they're pulling him out of his home and they're handcuffing him, he is screaming on camera that like he's innocent. He's telling them, "I'm innocent. I couldn't have done what, I don't even know what murder you're talking about." Like they pulled him out of bed to the point he was like, "What do you, the whole city knew about the murder, but this guy was literally dumbfounded because he had been asleep." And when they brought him in, he kept screaming that like he couldn't have done the murder because like they were saying that his car or something was in the intersection of this, and he was like saying he couldn't have done it. He doesn't even own a car. His vehicle he hasn't had his vehicle in months. And what got me interested in it, because at the time they were interviewing people about the fallen officer, and it was like people up north of the city, and everybody just condemned the guy as being guilty. And I thought, wait, you haven't even, there's no evidence to show that he has done it. There's no murder weapon,
Right.
There's no gunpowder residue, there's nothing other than like his car was supposed to be at, at this facility or whatever. And so I thought, wow, the whole city has condemned this dude, and we don't even know if he's actually done it or not. And so he had a public defender, of course, and by the grace of God, his public defender looked into the one claim that nobody was listening to, was that he said his vehicle wasn't there. And true enough, his vehicle couldn't have been there because the public prosecutor proved that the vehicle was like in a repair shop somewhere, like miles away. And so the guy got exonerated. But then there was another story that came out that when after he got exonerated, like police were harassing him, trying to make him confess to doing it. Like, you got off, but if, would drive by, point guns at his house and, do the little as they drove by, saying they were going to kill him. And he was thinking, and all I kept thinking was, first we condemned him. Now we're going to, they're going to harass this guy. And clearly it shows he didn't do it.
Right.
But we're going to make it so that he did it. And that got me interested in what that dynamic was like.
Right.
And when I started looking at the crime and reading on it, I was just, being from the west side of Chicago, there's like, just like if you're from the south side or the north side of Chicago, there's different things about how crime goes down that I grew up around crime. So there's different things you pick up about how criminals act and what things are done. So when I started reading up on this crime, I just started realizing there's things that don't add up. Like from the street point of view, if this guy is supposed to be a street thug, hustler, whatever you want to call it, there's things that just don't add up as to why, if he did it, why he did it so clean.
Yeah. Right.
Even if you're the best shooter or whatever, there's certain things you leave as evidence because you're not thinking like a crime scene detective would. And,
right.
And this cop and this civilian were killed in such a way that like there was literally no evidence. And I'm thinking,
no scene is that clean.
No scene is that clean, especially if it's like a homicide robbery thing.
Right. Right.
So that got me interested in like the what ifs. And with Blue Religion, it became some of it was inspired by that particular case, and some of it was inspired by stories I heard as a kid about this one gangbanger who had threatened to blow up a police department back in the day.
Wow.
And I used to think as a kid, when you're a kid, you hear this, you go, wow, it's kind of amazing, but it's a myth. And I was visiting some cousins out of town in Wisconsin. And we're at this big picnic, and I was with them, and I was mentioning the book I was writing and how this one gangbanger, his myth, inspired it. And there's a guy behind me goes, no, that wasn't a myth. That was a true story. He goes, I was there.
Oh my God.
You were there? He starts telling me the story of how they marched down on this police station, surrounded it, and the guy threatened to blow it up. He goes, yeah, he wasn't playing. He pulled a rocket launcher out the trunk. And I was like, wait, what?
A rocket launcher from the trunk.
So then it all started to make sense for me. And it was like, oh, yes, I see the through line. I see the pieces. And
oh, wow.
And then I knew I had a series, so I already know what the third and fourth books are going to be, which is weird. So I technically wrote the third book as the first book.
Oh, okay.
That I ever wrote, and then trashed it all because I was writing it back when I was in my undergrad. I was just writing this story about this cop, but I realized that's going to end up being the third book in this series. And then, I was watching something on a Discovery Channel or something, and this little news clip popped up, and I was like, that's going to be the fourth book.
Right. Isn't that crazy how one sentence or one storyline it might hit your brain, and then you're like, that's what I'm going to write about. I don't want to know anything else about it because I have my own version of what, but just that one sentence, that's the book because I'm immediately fascinated.
Yeah. Yeah. And the how the fourth book came about because again, I had lived in California. So I was like, oh, there's that California connection. I wanted to, piece together, and I was like, oh, it's perfect, that kind of thing. But yeah, it was the Blue Religion. It just came about this true crime that I just felt like there's one guy, the whole city condemned him, was trying to hang him for murder, for double homicide. He didn't commit, and he's telling it from day one. He's telling the truth. And then like a month later or whatever, when they go to trial or whatever, it comes out he couldn't have done it because, the one piece of evidence he's swearing is the thing that's going to be the thing that's going to exonerate him. Nobody listens to. But it takes one person to actually look it up. If the cops had did their due diligence in doing their investigation, they would have discovered it. And they probably did discover it. I'm not saying they didn't or did, but they probably did and didn't bring it up. But it took his lawyer to look into his claim to see, he couldn't have done this.
Right. The continuous frustration.
Yeah.
And then to be able to convey that. Yeah. That's challenging story for sure.
Yeah. And then the rest of it is just like, I love serious detectives. So I was just like, okay, I got something here. And I think for me, after the first book, there were people that were asking like, so when are we going to get another book? And I was like, I didn't have another book in my head.
I can't just snap my fingers.
Right. And then before I knew it, the third and fourth books kind of just came together. And I was like, oh, I got the ideas for them. And I just got to write them,
Yeah. That's,
First, I gotta have a second
that's
book.
the unfortunate part is all the months of hard work that you have to do.
Yeah. And I'm old school, so I write longhand.
Oh, wow.
It's even hard. It takes me longer to write a book.
I would think so.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I don't understand that at all. I got to tell you, my hand cramps up just writing out a grocery list. I don't really know how to handwrite anymore.
This is the hardest thing, but I love it because I feel so much more connected to the story. But it's such a hard thing.
And then you just go type up all the pages.
Yeah, type it up. Yeah.
Oh,
so
God,
I'll write so what I used to do was like I'll write, and then I kept losing notebooks or somebody would steal them. And so I was like, okay, so I'll write like 2 or 3 chapters. And by the time I get to the 4th chapter, I'm like, okay, it's time to start typing. So I'm always at least 3 or 4 chapters ahead of myself. But
right.
Like, I had to start typing because I would lose. I'd be at a coffee shop. I'd sit down and I'd forget the notebook somehow. And I'm like, how did I forget the notebook? And then I look in my bag. I'm like, it's because you got 10 other notebooks that looks exactly like it.
Oh, God, that makes me nervous. All right, we're going to do a little storytelling, man.
Yeah.
If you're up for it. So I just picked out 3 books kind of at random. We're just going to choose a sentence from one of them and just do a little back and forth for a couple minutes. But I've got Stephen King's latest book. I'm actually reading this right now, Billy Summers. I don't know if you're a King fan. To Kill a Mockingbird, classic. This is a very old paperback, really old. And then The Tender Bar, which is I highly recommend it. It's a memoir of a guy who basically grew up in a bar.
Okay.
And it's fantastic. But so choose one of those books.
Let's go with The Tender Bar. I've never.
All right. So choose a page between 1 and say 400.
5.
Oh. And then a sentence from like 1 through say 5.
3.
I didn't know what my father looked like.
He was old. I imagined him to be old, crusty, and smell of wine.
But even though I was blind, I would touch his face. And over the years, I noticed more and more wrinkles and more stubble. And though I never saw him, I saw him aging in my mind.
And yet I heard that age in his voice. The way he spoke to me from the tender age of 3 to now in my early 20s, I could hear that his voice was now changing over the decade or so. It got less, it sounded less strong and confident and more frail and afraid.
And now here I am. It's raining outside. I can hear it outside the church. There's humidity in the air. And I'm standing at my father's casket, and I'm putting my hands on his face for the very last time. His face is cold, colder than I would have expected. There are no more wrinkles. The makeup took care of that. I don't know what he looks like anymore.
Just a ghost, a lifeless shell. And yet, when I feel his rubbery, waxy fingers, I can feel the emblem of the ring that he wore. A ring that now has me intrigued. What does the eye with the piercing rays around it mean?
I don't know if anybody is looking at me. I don't think that they are. Not directly. I'm the only one standing up here alone. So I reach down and I slip the ring from his finger and I put it into my pocket. And I know the first thing I'm going to do when I get back home is find the origin of this ring, because I know it has something to do with what he told me a week before he died.
With his dying words, he told me the truth, that my mother is still alive somewhere in the world, and that the eye of the Inca holds the truth. But I didn't know what that meant until I looked down at his hand, or felt his hand, and felt the ring, and felt the eye of the ring. Now I wonder if the truth has always been right there in the palm of my hand.
And so my very last thought about my father for the day was one of frustration. Why didn't he just tell me more? And how the hell is this blind man supposed to travel the world to find my mother?
Whoa!
Let's call it there.
That's awesome.
There's your sixth book, man.
Yeah, that's like the blind Tomb Raider or something.
Right.
Yeah.
That was fun.
That was fun.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see what direction it goes, and whether it's emotional or procedural, or if it gets dark, or if it's, and everybody's energy is different. So it's always like, I don't ever collaborate on writing with anybody. So this is my ability to collaborate, and it's always a blast.
Yeah. That was fun.
So
that was a lot of fun.
Well, listen, man, it was great to meet you, and I'm very excited for your release of Blue Religion. That's always a wondrous moment when no matter how many times you do it, when your book comes out, you're like, oh yeah, my baby's in the world.
Right. And
so
go right the next one.
I'm living vicariously through you, because you've got a book coming out and very soon. And I'm just, that's great. And wish you all the success. So
yeah, I can't wait. It comes out October 12th. God, I was going like a week later. Yeah, it comes out October 12th. Blue Religion. Yeah, I can't wait, man. I can't wait for the world to witness Frank Calhoun and his new partner, Fred Lyons.
Right on, man. That's great. Well, nice talking to you, and hopefully get to meet you in person someday.
Yes, I hope so too. Thank you.
Take care, buddy.
All right. Bye. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
So that was my conversation with Alverne Ball. He was a great guy, and I really enjoyed our conversation. And I love to hear his passion about Chicago and his neighborhood, and just about the whole figuring out how to get published, figuring out how to handle rejections, and the tenacity, and then also figuring out how to fit in writing with other commitments, meaning like other full-time jobs. It's something that it isn't getting taught probably a whole lot. It sounds like Columbia College is doing some of that, but just really imparting the practical advice for aspiring writers, I think, is critical to understand the realities of publishing. Anyway, great guest. If you want to know more about Alverne, you can go to his website, which is alverneball.com, ALVERNEDBALL.com. If you want to find out more about me or know about my upcoming books or subscribe to my newsletter where you can win cool shit, just go to my website, which is carterwilson.com. More episodes coming out soon. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Take care.